people will basically say, I know what I saw. I saw a giant triangle, or I saw a black shape, or I saw these bright lights, or whatever they saw. So they know what they saw, and the only way they could possibly accept the idea that the government doesn't have any cool videos would be to invalidate their own experience, which is just not going to happen. And it's unfortunate that the explanations for something like that, like an event like that family all seeing the same thing, aren't really palatable explanations to that family and to other people who have, especially if you've listened to them and they've told you about, their accounts, and, you see how genuine they are.
Supposedly we have locations, I have operation name, I have witnesses, first-hand witnesses who have witnessed and seen X, Y, and Z at these places. And I guess for a lot of people, it would seem quite simple for someone like Sean Kirkpatrick to come back and say, I've been to the locations, I've spoken to the ICIG, I've found the locations, or I've been informed of where they are. I've been there, had a look around because I've got access to whatever I need, as he said in a previous interview, and there's nothing there. I've spoken to the witnesses, the first-hand witnesses, and they do not corroborate what Mr. Grusch has said. And I think if that was said, that would kind of put that to bed. But I think because they haven't come out and said that, one way or the other, to say, yes, I have done that, or no, I haven't. And if no, I haven't, well, why haven't you? The following is my conversation with Mick West. Mick is a British-American science writer and skeptical investigator, as well as a retired video game programmer. Mick also runs the website Metabunk, which is a website and forum where he covers subjects like UFOs and the paranormal. He's been deep into UFOs and UAPs for a long time, providing critical analysis on news shows and podcasts like Joe Rogan, as well as on his own YouTube channel. Whilst I don't agree with all of Mick's analysis on the UFO topic, I found him to be a respectful and gentle person who was able to provide his opinion in a respectful way. On this podcast, I like to talk to a broad range of people about the subject, as I often feel we can sometimes fall into an echo chamber of opinion, and differing opinions are useful to push the subject forward. So the following is my conversation with Mick West. Yeah, thanks for joining me. I really appreciate your time. I've been watching you for quite a long time on the internet, and I know that obviously I'm very interested in the UAP subject, very much on the kind of believer side of the fence, I would say. Very open to that and hold my hands up. But I feel like there's quite often we're very much in kind of echo chambers in the UAP UFO kind of community, certainly for the side that are very much the kind of hardcore believers. And I think it's useful and important, I think, to kind of get different perspectives and to analyze things as well. So I really appreciate, your time and speaking to me.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. I like talking to everybody on, with all kinds of different viewpoints. I think it's very important to do, to actually, just help mutual understanding and move things forward.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Okay, well, if it's okay with you, I just want to kind of get an idea of where it kind of started with you. So what first kind of interested you or piqued your interest in UFOs, UAPs?
Well, it kind of grew out of my interest in the chemtrails conspiracy theory. The long story is that I used to be a video game programmer, and then I kind of left the video game industry. I was transitioning out of it, moving into writing, and got into just kind of looking into conspiracy theories. And one of those was this chemtrails conspiracy theory, which is a lot to do with aviation. And I was also learning to fly at the time. And then it kind of naturally segued into UFOs, because when people are looking up in the sky, they see UFOs. And so you occasionally get this crossover between chemtrails and UFOs. People say, here's a UFO zapping a chemtrail, or here's a UFO leaving a contrail, or things like that. And I tried to track down what it was. And then it kind of just took off when, first of all, there was this Chilean Navy case a few years ago. And then after that, the 2017 New York Times article, and, To the Stars Academy, and the release of the 3 Navy videos, and all the attention that came with that. It just kind of upped the profile of the subject. And for me, I find it really interesting analyzing these videos trying to figure out what they actually show. I've done a lot of work using my coding background, my video game coding, because it's a lot of very similar mathematics. And I write little simulations and things, and it's a lot of fun. It's very interesting. And then, of course, engaging with the community, like trying to either explain things or discuss things. And there's various difficulties you have to navigate there, but it's all kind of interesting.
And where did it sort of start with the kind of moving into almost as if that's kind of a your next direction and metabunk, and you know, how did that come about, or was it kind of roughly the same kind of time that started?
Yeah, it was kind of a gradual process, I think. We were doing stuff that was similar to a lot of the UFO investigations with the contrail stuff. So, you know, around that time, like 2017, there was more UFO videos to analyze, especially the you know, things like Gimbal and Go Fast and the Tic Tac video. And it just kind of, things naturally kind of moved in that direction. And because it was so interesting, it's a good thing for people who, like, I have a kind of a nerdy group of people on Metabunk. So, you know, for a while we're interested in contrails and chemtrails. Then for another while we actually got into flat Earth, which was kind of interesting. Right? It came about really because of Eddie Bravo, who was a friend of Joe Rogan. Eddie Bravo, kind of entertains the whole flat Earth thing, and Joe was trying to debunk him, and so Joe Rogan had me on the show basically to talk about flat Earth, and so that kind of really revved up my interest in the whole flat Earth thing. And that again is kind of a fun thing because there's a lot of maths behind it, because the trigonometry and geometry and stuff of is the Earth curved or whatever. And all of that actually came in useful when I came to do some of the analyses, because some of the stuff to do with whether you can see things over the horizon or how much the refraction of the atmosphere lifts things up above the horizon was useful for things like analyzing the gimbal video. Because if you hypothesize it's far enough away, then the refraction of the atmosphere can raise it up. And all the work I did from that came from my interest in the flat Earth conspiracy theory. So it all just kind of rolled together, and now, you know, here we are. There's a lot of, there's not a lot of new stuff going on with flat Earth or chemtrails, but there's always new UFO cases to investigate. So it's an interesting little hobby.
Yeah, absolutely, keeping you busy. There's lots of stuff that's coming out now. What did you make of? So 2017 comes along. These three videos, and there's been a few that have been released, not by the Navy, I think, by the Border Protection Force. I think they are in the US. What did you make of the three videos that came out in 2017? Then, what was your kind of take on not so much the analysis of the footage, but the way that they were released, and kind of, did you have any kind of thought on why they were released? And, you know, because the Pentagon didn't have to say, did they?
Yeah, no. At the time, when they first came out, they weren't actually released by the Pentagon. Lou Elizondo had got them released, essentially. You know, with Chris Mellon was there, like, you know, helping out and everything, but really it was like Lou Elizondo getting them essentially declassified. But we didn't know any of this at the time. So at the time, all that happened is the New York Times has these videos that they say came from the government. Tom DeLonge releases the videos at the same time, and then there's analysis of these videos. So I didn't really think too much about where they'd come from. I assumed they were genuine, you know, U.S. Navy videos. You know, there's obviously the question at the start is, you know, are they fake? But since they were kind of vouched for by the New York Times, then, you know, I assumed that they were real, and so I just started analyzing them. Later, it kind of turned out like they weren't released by the government. The government thought that he was going to use them for like private study or something. It wasn't really clear how that would have worked. And then the government did release them. They released like official versions of them, which were actually slightly higher resolution. And that kind of, you know, added an extra wave of media interest because then it became official. And that wasn't super interesting because we'd already gone through the videos in great depth by that point. So I think it kind of just gave an air of legitimacy to the videos, which I already kind of assumed that they already had.
What did you make of David Fravor? Because when I speak to people, it's certainly people that aren't into the subject really, just kind of everyday friends and family and stuff. And when they when I mention anything to do with UFOs, UAP, and they're very much kind of dismissive, I'll often say, well, have a watch of the video with David Fravor and listen to this guy. He's, a very credible person. And that mixed with the footage, the Tic Tac is very compelling, was probably, I'd say, the most compelling, the testimony himself, Alex Dietrich's, and the footage along with it. What were your thoughts of the kind of mix between the footage and the testimony from credible people?
Well, it's unfortunate that we don't get like the two things together, like footage and testimony, because with David Fravor's thing, he didn't record any footage. People think he did. People sometimes think he recorded the gimbal video, but we know he didn't. But so there's this footage recorded by Chad Underwood later, and then there's Fravor's testimony. And because we have some video, it kind of makes his testimony more interesting. But he tells a very compelling story, and obviously is a very compelling person because he was the squadron leader, Top Gun graduate, like famous person being on TV, and he was on this barrier battleship. I can't remember what it was called, Carrier, I think it was called, PBS documentary, and he tells the story with certainty, like he knows what he saw, so it's very compelling, and people are kind of we trust our servicemen, and we honor and respect our servicemen and women because of what they do and because of the training that they have. So it makes for a very good introduction to people. If you want to convince someone, send them to watch David Fravor. But from my perspective, like David Fravor's account is, even though he's a very highly trained pilot and everything, is like another eyewitness account of a UFO that isn't really backed up by any tangible evidence other than his account. There were other things going on around that time, which have some evidence. We've only really got the video. I mean, even the older stuff like the radar encounters, all we have there really is essentially eyewitness accounts and memories from people like Kevin Day. So what he saw, he seems very convinced that he saw a very rapidly moving, flying tic-tac shaped craft. But when you kind of dig down into his account, there's a number of kind of little questions and discrepancies between his account and Alex Dietrich's account, and even Jim Slay's account, who was the backseater in Alex Dietrich's plane. Like, he describes things that weren't seen by the others. And then you look at the old reports that came out at the time. I think probably like someone like Jay Stratton interviewed Fravor for the UAP task force, or maybe for ATIP, where way back in the day. And some of the accounts there, like, they don't match exactly. And one person describes something moving around, something describes it moving at 500 knots across the ocean, and they even note that discrepancy there. So yeah, it's a very compelling thing. If you just take David Fravor's account and have him describe it to somebody, it's like, whoa, this actually happened. But you can kind of say that with loads and loads and loads of other accounts. People are very convinced that they saw something amazing, and unfortunately we never get a good resolution to those stories. Often what happens is when we do actually get data of what actually happened, the story turns out to be not as interesting as it seemed initially. Like, for a good example with that is the Starlink cases. There's been loads of reports of pilots seeing these. They initially described them as racetrack patterns, and sometimes they're kind of doing these little crisscross patterns, like little dogfights. One pilot, former military pilot, described it as a mile-long craft, like moving along, way above his plane. But whenever we get the actual data behind those stories, it turns out to be entirely consistent with Starlink satellites. We've got these very exact recreations that we do in 3 dimensions, and you can show where the sun is and where the satellites are and the line that glints off them. But when we don't have that data, all we have is the eyewitness account. So we got like kind of two sets of eyewitness accounts. We got eyewitness accounts that we eventually get enough data from, and they all resolve into something boring. And then we've got eyewitness accounts where we don't have enough data, and we just can't resolve what they are. And it might be that in those eyewitness accounts where we don't have enough data, like in Fravor's account, it's actually something really interesting. But the track record so far of resolved eyewitness accounts, they all resolve to boring things. So it's perhaps an indication of what's in this other set of things. We don't know though, and that's that unknowability that gives the story legs.
I think there's probably the kind of argument on the other side is that the footage that we're given by the government is the stuff that isn't compelling, and that's kind of intentional, because if there is this conspiracy by the government to kind of withhold this information, and they'll drip feed us something, but it's something that ultimately will be resolved essentially as something very boring and simple, a balloon, an aircraft from some distance or something like that. So I guess that's kind of the argument, that the only reason the data is not very good is because we're just being provided not very good data.
Yes. Well, that argument though works in both ways though. You see, there's two possibilities here. One is that we don't have non-human intelligence visiting us and everything we see is just mundane or human technology. And then the other one is that we do have non-human intelligence, and some of these cases that we see are actually, being alien craft, essentially, for want of a better word. Non-human intelligence, alien, same thing, essentially. But what's happening with the government is them giving us these crappy, boring cases would be the same either way. So it's not really evidence for one thing or another. You could say it doesn't disprove anything. It doesn't prove that they're all mundane. So there could be this kind of conspiracy to cover it up. But it also could be the case that Sean Kirkpatrick could be entirely honest in what he's saying. The stuff that he's showing us is perhaps entirely typical of the type of cases that they get. Things like the Middle East sphere, which was this sphere that kind of zipped along, looked like it's moving very rapidly. Initial analysis suggested it was probably like something like a balloon, because it wasn't actually moving, it's all parallax. And recently that was analyzed in much more depth by Bellingcat, who do this lot of geolocation stuff. They found exactly where this sphere was, and was able to show exactly how fast it was moving and how big it was, and it's entirely consistent with a balloon. So we're not actually getting interesting cases, possibly because all the cases are not interesting. That's a possibility that you have to consider. The problem is with the UFO community, and perhaps including yourself, a lot of people within the UFO community have had their own experience of something that is highly anomalous. And so for a lot of people in the UFO community, including people like, say, Gary Nolan, and other people, I'm sure lots of the people, the people who've had experiences. So for them, they have this individual set of data which shows that there is something going on. So but that means that for them, there has to be essentially some kind of government cover-up. But unfortunately, like from the outside perspective, we don't know if that person's experience was an actual valid encounter with a non-human intelligence, or was it just some kind of misperception or hallucination or something like that. And it's very difficult, obviously, to discuss this with people who are convinced of what they saw. You're not going to there's you might have seen some interactions online. People will basically say, I know what I saw. I saw a giant triangle, or I saw a black shape, or I saw these bright lights, or whatever they saw. So they know what they saw, and the only way they could possibly accept the idea that the government doesn't have any cool videos would be to invalidate their own experience, which is just not going to happen.
Have there been any cases that you've looked at, you've analyzed, and you thought, actually, this is really compelling to the sort of point that it perhaps has kind of put you in almost taken you slightly towards this might be something else in the something else box?
Well, not really where we have good data. There are lots of kind of accounts, like David Fravor's account, that if they were accurate, then that would be really amazing and interesting, and perhaps solid evidence of some non-human non-human intelligence or some kind of entity or some very advanced technology, if it was true. But there aren't any very compelling cases where we have good data. And that's what we really need. And that's really what ufology is lacking. It's just something like, 2 videos from 2 different viewpoints showing a craft moving in a way that a human craft couldn't do. But we don't get that. We get individual videos of ambiguous things where you can't tell how far away they are, and often just lights in the sky, sometimes just little black dots. Or we get the eyewitness accounts, or we get fake videos. You've seen lots of fake videos. There's some very sophisticated fake videos. Now, I tend to not go towards like assuming things are fake, because most UFO videos are real, but there are some that are fake. So it's kind of difficult to get excited about things. If you see an anonymous video on YouTube, like I saw one that was like a giant ship hovering above some clouds, but it's an anonymous video. Like, I was on TikTok, I think. You can't really get excited about it because you don't really have additional data. You don't even know who took it. You probably is fake just looking at it. But if it wasn't, then why didn't a whole bunch of other people get it? So no, the short answer is that of the cases where we have data, like especially video, no, there's no real compelling, interesting cases that look like they are something non-human.
Yeah. Okay.
Lots of cool stories, though.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you make of what's happening in Congress and in the States in terms of the sort of narrative change? What are your thoughts on that? Because for me, it seems like there's been a massive change in the language and the narrative from the government and from officials, whereas before it was very silly and we don't talk about it, and now it's very much talked about in the White House, etc., etc. What are your thoughts on that? What do you make of it?
Well, I don't think the Pentagon as such really said much about it at all. It just isn't a subject that they would really discuss. It's something I think that they prefer to like just pass off. They weren't that interested in ufology. Now, there is an organization within the military in the US military called NASICS. I think it's the National Aerospace Intelligence Center, and they go back to the 1940s, and their job is to reverse engineer things and to reverse engineer captured foreign technology. And if we did have, say, captured craft or something, it would be going to them. If there was like, UFOs that actually demonstrated anomalous physical behavior in the air, then we had good video of it, they would be analyzing it, someone like that. But instead, now we had this new organization, Arrow, which is kind of the end result of all this legislation that's come out. Yeah, it's not just the end result; it's kind of like the middle result in the way, because there's stuff in the mix still. And I think this is, in a way, kind of like a separate track within the government, within the Pentagon, and it's kind of one that's driven by people who are believers in the say the non-human intelligence hypothesis. People like Chris Mellon, he calls it the extraterrestrial hypothesis, and he's quite a big fan of it. And obviously people like Elizondo, and there's a broad spectrum of people. There's this whole group of people within, say, academia and industry and the military and perhaps in government that we could refer to as the invisible college, which is this concept popularized by Jacques Vallée, I think back in the 70s, maybe earlier. That there's like a group of people who think that there's good evidence of non-human intelligence, and they're working behind the scenes to try to analyze it and promote disclosure. And these are people like Jacques Vallée. And of course, there's a whole storyline there going through Robert Bigelow and Harry Reid and George Knapp. And all these people, all these personalities within the UFO community have been, beavering away, working on this. And, Chris Mellon arrives, gives them a conduit to government. Chris Mellon hooks up with Tom DeLonge. Kind of an unlikely person, but he's quite a big mover in this. And then this is all coordinated with Lou Elizondo, who goes to work for Tom DeLonge and then talks to the New York Times, and Chris Mellon gets these videos out with Louis Elizondo, and they release all this. And based on this wave of interest created by these videos, Chris Mellon basically lobbies for the original UFO legislation, which establishes the UAP task force and the reporting requirements. He does this with Marco Rubio. And basically what we've seen since then is just basically building upon that. The initial momentum that they got from the New York Times story and the videos and Tom DeLonge's initial efforts, the documentaries and all the things like that, led to public interest. Public interest, to a certain extent, drives government interest, which is really just political interest. And so people were able to get these various bits of legislation in, and they're not like the bills that Congress voted on. They're like little things that got added to these defense bills, and small amounts of money, and people were just not that interested in it. So a small amount of politicians were able to push this through, and I think that's basically what's happened. And then so things become law, and then the Pentagon has to do things. And that's something it's used to doing. It's a big bureaucracy. It's saying, what is the law? We have to fulfill this. Like the law is that we have to set up a UAP task force. So the original one, what should we do? Well, let's give it to Jay Stratton. He's the guy who's interested in UFOs. They faff around for a while, don't really get much out of that. It's a brief transition into AIM-SOG. Legislation is changing again because they want to make it more. Then Arrow comes along and they've changed the legislation again. They say, no, stop looking at balloons. Like, we want to look at the things that are not balloons. And so now they're trying to get Arrow just to focus on things that are not balloons. Arrow's like, well, we've got to eliminate all the balloons. So we've got to keep working on, how to eliminate balloons. What do balloons look like? But if you read Arrow's last report, it says this report is issued pursuant to, blah, 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 this particular thing, and under the offices of this. He said that basically we're doing this report because we have to do it by law. They're not saying we've got all this amazing information about UFOs, which is really interesting, and here it is. They're saying the government made us do this report. We're going to do our best job at it. I'm sure it varies by individual, but I think Kirkpatrick seems to be doing a reasonable job if you assume he's not covering something up. If there's nothing actually there, what he's actually doing seems quite reasonable. He's trying to figure out, if Dee Sawyer's recent off-camera interview, well, you're going to see it, you would have heard it. He talks about how they're doing things like seeing what does a weather balloon look like from all kinds of different planes and different velocities, and what would it look like on radar? What does it look like on FLIR? They're setting a big database so they can compare cases to this kind of reference set and possibly use it to educate pilots. So they're doing things that are perfectly reasonable. But it was kind of driven, I think, by this invisible college, by people who believed in UFOs. And I think it's something that was probably already mostly being covered by people like NASIC, and they didn't really need a new body. But maybe some good stuff will come out of it. It's certainly an interesting topic and an interesting thing to investigate, which I'm doing.
Absolutely. I'll tell you what I find quite interesting, and I think this is part of the reason why there's so much speculation, is that when you look at David Grusch's testimony, when you look at the comments he'd made, there was some fairly simple things that you think would be quite easy. So some pieces of information that would be fairly easy to deal with and to resolve, and to say, look, this person's a fantasist, we can move on. Supposedly we have locations, I have operation name, I have witnesses, first-hand witnesses who have witnessed and seen X, Y, and Z at these places. And I guess for a lot of people, it would seem quite simple for someone like Sean Kirkpatrick to come back and say, I've been to the locations. I've spoken to the ICIG, I've found the locations, or I've been informed of where they are. I've been there, I had a look around because I've got access to whatever I need, as he said in a previous interview, and there's nothing there. I've spoken to the witnesses, the first-hand witnesses, and they do not corroborate what Mr. Grusch has said. And I think if that was said, that would kind of put that to bed. But I think because they haven't come out and said that, one way or the other, to say, yes, I have done that, or no, I haven't. And if no, I haven't, well, why haven't you? Because in theory, the testimony provided by David Grusch first time kind of under oath, something this specific, this kind of unique, you would think that, I appreciate you want to go and explore the balloons, and there's all sorts of other things that that he's going to be provided with to go and investigate hundreds and hundreds of cases, no doubt. But you would have thought this one piece of testimony would be something that, well, we'll deal with this as a priority because it's got such public interest. Once that's resolved, then we can move on to everything else.
Yeah, it would be great if we could do that. I mean, I think there's probably a number of issues there. For a start, like David Grusch is going through, is in the middle of an Inspector General complaint, which places limits upon how he can interact with people who might be people who are on the other side of that complaint. It's like they're not supposed to talk to him if they're they're essentially the guilty party in a way. So it might be that if he's raised a complaint against Kirkpatrick, then you can't actually talk to him. But now we have this kind of conflict. Kirkpatrick says that he's extended an invitation to Grusch, I think 4 times or 4 or more times, and Grusch says, "I never got any such invitation." So that's we can kind of drill down to that as a starting point. Let's resolve that thing. Like, did they actually try to reach out to him? Is that something that did actually happen? Can we FOIA those requests? I know that John Greenwald has FOIA'd those particular requests, and there should be things that will come out because they're not especially classified. Just asking someone to come in, it should be quite reasonable. So yeah, we should be able to resolve these things. But I think a big part of the problem is things like the Inspector General being involved, but also the stuff that he is talking about, even if it's not, say, reverse engineering captured alien technology, it's quite likely stuff that's very highly classified. It could be like programs to reverse engineer Russian and Chinese technology, things that are super classified, that you don't want anybody to have any inkling whatsoever that these programs even exist. So they're very highly compartmentalized, need to know basis. And it could be that somehow he butted up against them in his asking around about things. It might also be that there are some programs historically where people thought they were actually investigating UFOs. We know there are strange things that the government has done in the past. There was the Project Stargate, where they basically experimented with psychic powers, and you decided eventually it wasn't really worth pursuing. But it's the type of thing that's it has happened in the past. Maybe you think psychic powers are real, but most scientists would say that it was a ridiculous waste of time, and so they. It's not the type of thing the Pentagon wants to boast about. Maybe there was also similar types of programs involving like UFOs or some kind of crossover type thing. As Gary Nolan succinctly points out, the woo, the supernatural, is always just around the corner in this topic. There's lots of talk about things like consciousness and things like that. But with the government's involvement, I think we don't know. We don't really know what Grusch was referring to. Obviously we don't know because it's secret, but we do know he was he was cleared at a fairly high level, and so it may well be that he's found evidence of some historical programs that either probably resembled UFO reverse engineering programs, or he's come across current programs which are, say, reverse engineering foreign technology or technology of unknown origin, perhaps. Perhaps like a rocket probe crashed and we couldn't tell where it came from because it didn't have the markings on it. I think the degree of secrecy that any such programs would have, regardless of what they actually are, means it's going to be very difficult. And, in the event that it is actually reverse engineering unambiguously non-human intelligence craft, that's going to be secret as well. So unfortunately, like I was saying earlier, the argument works both ways, and because it would look the same either way. If there's no aliens then it would look like it would still have top secret programs that we couldn't talk about. If there were aliens, then that might well be a top secret program that we can't talk about either. No one's talking, so I don't know. How do we move forward? It's an interesting situation. I really hope that something comes out of it, though. I hope we get some resolution about what Grusch is actually talking about. But because it's so secret, we might not.
Yeah, fingers crossed. And I think that's probably the way that we'll get to some kind of a resolution, is probably not so much from government, but from people like yourself and other kind of citizen journalists and people looking at and analysing FOIA, the Black Vault, things like that. I think taking things on one step at a time, as you say, with regards to the communication between Kirkpatrick and Grusch, is a good first step, and kind of going along, putting the pieces together in the jigsaw and seeing what we come out with.
Maybe, yeah. I mean, really, it would be great if someone came forward and just blew the whistle. I mean, that's supposedly what Grusch is doing, but he's not. He's not giving any actual information. He's just saying, I've heard these things, I believe these things, and I can show you them in a skiff, and then we can't get in a skiff for some reason. But yeah, at some point you'd think that someone would just say, screw it, and then just here's all the information. Yeah, here's the data, or
75
here's
years
the photos.
is a long time, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, you think people do come forward. I mean, we say there's no whistleblowers, but there are people who claim to be whistleblowers. But then there's also things like the Disclosure Project with Stephen Greer, where the people who come forward make these really outrageous claims. Obviously they can't be true, like things that there are visible bases on the moon and things like that. So it's, we need actual data. It's almost like people come forward and they tell you things. Like I know, what's his name, Michael Schellenberger. He says he talks to a bunch of whistleblowers. They all told him about these reverse engineering programs, and so I asked him, did they show you anything, or were they just saying stuff? And he was like, they were just saying stuff. There's nothing to show. Until there's something to show, it's all just going to be people talking. And that's going to be a very difficult thing to convince people either way of what's actually going on if it's just people talking, especially when the stories become increasingly outrageous. Now, I talked about the Disclosure Project and some of those silly stories, but Grusch's stories, a lot of those seem very outrageous. Like the idea that there was a crashed craft in 1933 in Magenta, Italy, and it was recovered and with the help of the Vatican and smuggled back to the United States, and it's in a Lockheed Martin hangar now. These are pretty outrageous claims. These claims that we've recovered alien bodies, the claims that aliens have murdered people, as Ross Coulthart put it, and Grusch seemed to agree with. These are pretty outrageous things. Craft that are bigger inside than on the outside. Because the stories are so outrageous, you need something more than the story to back that up. Because we've got these, fairly mundane stories, like we found a crashed flying saucer. I mean, that's entirely plausible. Say 1,000 years ago, visiting aliens crashed in the desert and their craft was discovered. If that happened, I don't see why not. I don't see why it wouldn't happen. It seems kind of unlikely based on what we know about the universe, but maybe, yeah. But we don't have any evidence of it. And then along with that, we have all these other extreme claims, which makes the less extreme claims seem less likely because it's the same person making the same claim. So then you've got the idea, is the government trying to mess everything up by introducing these weird stories on top of the plausible stories? But at the end of the day, all you've got are stories, and you've got people telling the same stories to each other and then relating them to other people as if they are like real stories. And then you've got these crappy videos which don't actually show anything particularly interesting. So we need to step up the data. We need to step up the analysis of the data. We need to see, is there actually anything interesting there? It's not just like military stuff. The sky is open source. We can see everything that flies in the sky. Lots of people have great cameras. We should be able to get some good evidence, but we haven't been able to. So we're stuck with the stories.
Yeah. So what we need is something just to land on the White House lawn that would
We don't,
solve.
though. I mean, that's what people joke about. Like, oh, what would it take?
Yeah.
Would you like a flying saucer landing on your outside your house? No, I mean, you just need something that clearly demonstrates maneuverability that humans can't do. So it could be something flying down from space. It could be
Yeah.
something, orbiting the moon. It could be something that just hovers in midair and where it's viewed from different locations, and then it shoots up. You've seen loads of videos where something hovers and then shoots up, but they're all like fake, or they're misleading, or whatever they are. You don't see anything that's unambiguously anomalous, and that's what we need. We need an unambiguously anonymous piece of data that can't be attributed to sensor error, and it can't be attributed to being fake because there's multiple versions of it, and it can't be attributed to being like parallax or misjudged distance because we've got multiple viewpoints. That shouldn't be something that's impossible to get if these things are actually happening. And yet it seems really difficult to get that unambiguously anonymous data. We don't need things landing on the White House lawn. We just need 2 iPhone videos of a dot in the sky moving at impossible velocities viewed from 2 locations. That's all you need.
Yeah, but I think that perhaps for yourself to satisfy, because you understand the data and you're deep in this subject. But I think for the everyday person, to get 2 kind of mobile phones and a dot in the sky and understanding the trajectory, well, hang on a minute, that's not possible without physics. That trajectory, the everyday person, I think, if they're given that, well, it's alien stuff.
But it doesn't matter though. It doesn't matter because what you would convince is scientists, people who people who do have the skill set, people like me and actual physicists and scientists will be able to analyze that and say, yes, this is it. They'd write papers on it. They'd publish papers, unambiguously anomalous phenomena viewed on blah, blah, blah. And if it was unambiguous, they'd all agree. Yeah, it wouldn't be like this big public debate. It's like, yes, this is what this video shows. Yes, we verified that these videos are genuine, and this is what it's showing. And so they'd write their science papers. The media would report on it. Scientists prove aliens are visiting, and then the public would accept it, even though the video is crappy looking. It's not showing a big floating flying saucer. It's just showing 2 dots. The science would be there, and it would be agreed upon, and the media would follow that, and the population would be convinced. So really, that is all that you need.
I think when you're deep, as I am, in the other side of things, you forget that the data, but you're very driven by emotion. You're very driven by the testimony of people, and I think that's very powerful when you speak to people that you fully believe. And my entire family saw this. I spoke to a lady not too long ago who saw this with her family as a child. They grew up, and dad and everyone remembered it for many, many years to come. Something profound that couldn't be anything other than. It couldn't be something that we would have had technologically at that time when she was a kid. And when you speak to somebody like that, the only way that it isn't true is if the entire family's had some kind of a psychotic situation or it wouldn't make sense. And I guess that doesn't work with the data side of it, because if you look at that from a scientific perspective, there's no data. It's just people have seen something, it's unusual, it's hard to explain. That doesn't mean that it's non-human, for example, or, extraterrestrial time travel. But for that person, there's no other explanation. And I think you touched on that yourself earlier on. And I think when you're kind of deep in it, as I am from kind of the other side, it's hard to kind of move over and say, well, there's no data. So, I've got to keep that kind of line.
No, it's definitely, that's a very, very good point. I mean, it's really what's behind a lot of, it's why the UFO community moves past essentially this lack of data, is that they have all their individual experiences and the experiences of other people, like that family. And it's unfortunate that, the explanations for something like that, like an event like that family all seeing the same thing, aren't really palatable explanations to that family and to other people who have, especially if you've listened to them and they've told you about, their accounts, and, you see how genuine they are. It's difficult to to say to them, well, maybe this is essentially mass psychogenic illness or something like that, or a folie à deux, where you all suffer from the same kind of shared delusion, essentially. These are explanations that they're very distasteful, even though these are things that actually happen. To the person they are happening to, that explanation does not work, and you just can't go there, and it becomes contentious, and you really have to treat people with respect. I wasn't there, I don't know what they saw, and any explanation I put forward probably isn't going to be a good one. I might think, you all saw a helicopter or something, whatever it was, and you just misperceived its speed, and that comes across as just being kind of dismissive of their testimony. So yeah, it's a very difficult thing, and I'm very aware of this issue, and I'm aware that even my kind of broader discussions of UFOs and saying there might be nothing there can seem to be very insulting to people who have had their own experience. And it's just kind of unfortunate that if you go with the pure science, it kind of butts up against individual people, and people are going to be hurt one way or the other.
Yeah. Ultimately, in order to get some kind of resolution, we do need the science behind it, don't we? We need the data and the science, and I completely agree. And I think that's the only way we're going to kind of resolve this long-standing question of, are we alone in the universe? What's out there? What are people seeing? Is to have data that categorically says this is what this is. And without that, it's going to go on forever, isn't it?
Well, that's the problem, though. Like, if there isn't anything there, you're not going to get the data. So it will go on forever. So the only way it can essentially end is if we get this, black swan data, this prime example of something that's unambiguously anomalous. But if we don't get it, it's just going to keep going, because people are going to have the same types of experiences. We know, maybe some of them are genuine, but we also know that there are lots of experiences that people had that turn out not to be, what they thought. Doesn't mean that they're all like that. But it does mean that these types of experiences will happen. People will misperceive things. I've misperceived things. And so in the future, we'll have UFOs and UAPs and all kinds of other things as well. And if they are a real thing, you would hope eventually we'll get some good data. Unfortunately, the track record isn't that great. But, fingers crossed. And perhaps if we get more of these essentially false positives and explanations, it might help people get better perspective. But the problem with that is that's all being kind of messed up by Project Blue Book, and Project Blue Book having as a stated goal, we'll explain the explainable cases and show to people that most things are explainable, and people take that as, oh, this is what we're doing to cover up the unexplainable cases. And the same thing's happening now. It's with Arrow. People are saying Arrow is explaining all these cases, and they're just about to release information on a supposedly transmedium thing, which turned out not to be transmedium. They're doing things like that to cover up the inexplicable things. But that assumes that these inexplicable things are actually interesting, and I suspect they're probably just inexplicable due to a lack of data. Let's have more data. Let's have more videos. Let's have Avi Loeb go out and put cameras on every university rooftop. Have him go hunt for micrometeorites. More data is better for everyone.
100% agree. 100% agree. That's brilliant. Well, Mick, thanks very much for that. Really appreciate you. Really appreciate your time, and I hope to speak to you again at some point in the future.
Yeah, thanks. It was an interesting conversation. Thank you.
Take care of yourself. Thanks.
All right, Jimmy. Bye. Yeah.